Hi, welcome back to Coworking with Iris. I'm Iris Kavanaugh, and I'm excited today to be talking to my friend Jerome Chang of Blank Spaces. We'll be covering designing your space when it's cool to DIY, hopefully a fair amount of the time, and when you actually need to hire an architect or somebody to manage the build-out process. If you have any questions, please ask them by posting them to me on Twitter at Iris Kavanaugh. And let's get started. Hi, Jerome. Welcome.
Hi.
Tell us a little about yourself today.
So I'm an architect and the founder of Blank Spaces. We started about 8-9 years ago. Founded in 07 and opened doors in early 08. So that makes us one of the earlier adopters of this whole movement. And I really just sought to find office space for myself and took it upon myself to invite people to join my office. So to this day, I've been able to scale the company, the brand, opening a third location next week in Hollywood, which is now about 15,000 square feet, so about 3 times more than my first one. First one's Mid-Wilshire at 5,000, downtown is about 8,000, and Hollywood is 15,000. So it's been nice to watch the whole co-working movement grow, and then help grow my own company proportionally. And then separately, I also still practice as an architect for private clients, mostly in the office space and restaurants sectors.
And what percentage of your private clients are co-working spaces or shared workspaces, or are they mostly traditional single occupying offices?
Yeah, I haven't worked on a co-working kitchen yet. You would think I would have dabbled in that already, but I would say there's very few architects who have really studied this co-working space, and even fewer who also looked at restaurants. And then even fewer than that who've actually been in the trenches of operations to see how all that ties together. But one day. But the restaurant industry is already a tough animal as it is, and I applaud anyone who's tried to do on a co-working level. But yes, most of my tenants, my private clients for office and restaurant sectors are all just single-use occupiers. I have done a bunch of consulting for co-working initiatives. And I've done some design as the lead designer on those, but the only ones that have actually been built out to my specs have just been for myself.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and get started talking about the design process itself. So oftentimes, as we both know, in the co-working world, somebody decides they want to open a co-working space out of a personal need or a professional need. And they might not have any design background. They also might not have the money to spend on a huge expensive build out or an architect to manage, to design and manage the build out. In that case, what advice do you give people who are needing to really DIY design their space, both with respect to providing a work environment that enhances collaboration and allows for the focused, quiet work that oftentimes people need throughout their workday, and really keeps an eye on the bottom line?
Yeah, hiring an architect is both a need and a want. I think the want is for sure there, unless you already are very experienced in designing a space. Even if it's your personal passion or hobby to know design, which usually will be decoration and not so much design. But so the want, I think, is there. The value is hard to assess because, unfortunately, architects just aren't at the high level that doctors and lawyers are, that people feel the absolute need to hire them. And so it's more of a want, and I get it. It's a challenge that we architects have to face every day. But there's a lot of spaces out there who really need to hire an architect, either because you need to rezone and therefore get a permit from the planning department. You need to significantly make big renovations in the space that then requires an architect to draw up the drawings and even more importantly, sign the drawings in a way that the city will then grant you a building permit. There are, of course, a ton of spaces out there, co-working, cafes, even restaurants, who never even got a proper building permit to build out. I'll leave those alone, but it's dangerous, it's risky, but it does happen, and I don't fault people to cut corners just at a desperate need to save money or to get through the project faster. When you add a permit process and a design process to all that, I can understand how it seems to often go on tangents. So yeah, basically when you need to hire an architect, is mostly when you need to rezone or you have just significant amount of construction, such as adding or subtracting or replacing the bathrooms, or there's not enough exit doors, or add a exit door, any kind of thing that just looks like a lot of surgery.
Is there sort of a general layout that you would advise is something to consider when designing a shared workspace? If somebody is not able to hire an architect, how do they know sort of, there's been a lot of debate over the years in terms of, open versus private offices and phone booths and kitchens being a main aspect of the space versus tucked away into a little corner somewhere. So in terms of actual design features or layout of the space itself, what kind of tips can you provide people?
Yeah, this whole argument about open and closed thing is, it's not so black and white. In fact, it's almost never black and white. I really believe that there's, lack of better words, there's a 50 shades of gray in between, and maybe, for the sake of my own brand colors, 50 shades of blue. Just like co-working is mostly driven by the culture, the programming, the community. So these intangible aspects that are quite critical, but yet, not tangible. And it's hard, they're not very discrete. Architecture is very much driven by the intangibles as well, the programming, the circulation, the occupancy type, which is, whether you have an event or event usage or office usage or some kind of retail usage. All those intangibles really are what drives and shapes the space. And if you can think about more of what you want or need and not the end result as in, closed or open, I think you'll arrive at a much better holistic, overall better, solution or space. But I can understand why, the tangible, the discrete, black and white, open and closed is what people use and they rely on, even though it's only like not even 5% of how I conceive of a space and how anyone should conceive of a space.
Mm-hmm. And so if we were to then talk about the open space in a co-working space, which I think we can all agree that some type of open space is critical for collaboration. How would you go about offering design advice to somebody who is creating open space? And how much light do you think is important in that open space? Is it okay if you move into a building that has low ceilings? How do you get around some of those constraints within a building if you don't have a big budget, and be able to provide that open collaborative atmosphere that really inspires people to want to work together?
Yeah, I think people have a lot more tools than they realize. And part of that really is just how you perceive your own problem. If you think of black and white, there's obviously a gray, and then there's shades of gray. So instead of thinking so binary, just like the gender discussions of whether you're, for one gender or the other. There's actually a lot more variations of that. And so if you think simply in an open space, instead of black and just white, are there multiple variations within black? And are there multiple variations within white? And let's just say white is open and black is a closed office space. In a closed office space, does it have to be all closed, or can it be somewhat open and somewhat closed? Well, suddenly now your black has versions of black. Maybe it's shiny black, maybe it's matte black. And your white, it may be open, but which part of it is open, right? Is it an open space where you're facing each other, or is it an open space where you're not facing each other, the other way? And that's already two more, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's only facing each other. Maybe one person's sitting down, and one person's standing up. You're open, but you're at different elevations. So a classic case is maybe an open double height atrium, where you have a ground floor and you have a mezzanine. Both are open, but different elevations. So you have layers there. And so it's about breaking down and almost dissecting what you think as one or two options and breaking it down even more so there's more layers, more tools. And from there, you suddenly have an arsenal of tools and you mix and match accordingly. Just like if you have a separate meeting area, okay, but it doesn't have four walls. It's designated as meeting area, so it's physically separate from the rest of the open space. Acoustically, it's open. Visually, it's not, because it has some kind of divider, right? So in some sense, you can almost break it down into your five senses, right? If it's open, is it open visually, open acoustically, open by smell? Maybe it's only open by visual, but closed by this. So visual will be glass, and but then it cuts off most of the noise. So your open now has 3 or 4 layers. So if you look at your human senses, you look at it in terms of directionality, any number of ways you want to just say, can open just be one, a monologue, or is it multiple variations? And suddenly you have an arsenal of tools.
So what I'm hearing to the answer to the majority of these questions I'm asking so far is kind of, in a lot of ways, the sort of default or go-to answer for anything in the co-working business or in the co-working movement, which is, it depends on what your community's needs are, or what your particular brand is, or what the space itself naturally provides. And so what we're really referring to here is a spectrum. There's a spectrum of design, and how you look at design in terms of how it relates to the community that you have and the community that you're developing, just as there is a spectrum of that community. And so if we were to look at the spectrum as being more geared towards collaboration and less geared towards individual private spaces, which I think we can agree don't necessarily foster community as readily as open collaborative spaces do, how would you then advise somebody to look at an open space? And let me take an example. So let's say I'm going to open a community-based, people-based co-working space. And I have a building that I've identified as the building that I'm going to open my space out of. I don't have a lot of money to spend on build out. And there's 18 private offices. There's a small open space. But the majority of those private offices are built with really removable pony walls. I would like to provide more open space, being that I would like to encourage more collaboration. And I also believe that in my market, the majority of my members are going to be individuals, freelancers, single operators. So would you say that I should look at sort of a percentage of my revenue goals, as well as what the market can bear in terms of types of memberships? in order to determine which offices I should tear down and create open space out of? How would you advise me to make those decisions?
Well, at the end of the day, it's a business. So you're going to have to look at your economics. I've been recently advocating a direct correlation between your revenue and your design, and to then have a strong dialogue and therefore justify any money that you invest towards a certain space, whether it's a desk, it's a lounge seat, or an office space or meeting, private office or meeting room space. I think that's a really difficult conclusion to make off the cuff like this, but you just have to see what you want to spend really and what revenue you can get out of it. But if you have a slate of private offices, I would really encourage instead of creating one big open space and then wondering if it's too loud or such, I would try creating pockets of open space. So let's say you have a line of office space, one hallway and a line of office spaces, and let's say 10 offices on each side of the corridor. Instead of taking down 4 offices on one end and creating open space and then a string of offices, I would create a pocket of open space maybe every 3rd office. And so you have open spaces, but that they have some level of privacy and separation between one and the other, and that can help minimize the distractions from one space to the next.
Mm. So in doing so, you're naturally creating pockets where people can mix, people can mingle, people can dive in and get some heads down individual work done.
Because you have an overall community that you're fostering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is curated or a subset of your public community, which is your neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But within your space, you have to be able to break it down so that your community can then subdivide itself, maybe by sector, maybe by friends, maybe by company, so that one company can carve out one section and kind of have their own area, but then they can still work within an overall co-working space. So you're allowing it to subdivide and layered in a way that isn't so, again, binary. It isn't about offices on one side and open space on the other. You can really mix it in.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the discussion of hiring an architect, what are, I think a lot of people who would be opening a space out of a personal or individual professional need, they might not have ever worked with an architect before, or know how to find a good architect who knows what they're doing, especially with this, I don't want to say futuristic, but future of work type design that we're talking about here. It's a shift in the way that we've been working until the last 10 years or so. So what tips do you have to share with people for how to find an architect that is going to be the right person and the right fit for their project?
I had a restaurant client who I work with every few years. It's been great. He opens a restaurant every few years, so it's a repeat business for me. One of the things he says to me, I've always remembered, was he only wants to hire consultants with whom he could have a beer with whom that person would want to come to the restaurant on their own and bring other people, which means bring more business. So at the end of the day, a lot of us consultants we're commodities. Mm-hmm. Commodities with some slightly better value than the next commodity, but we architects are really commodities. So are lawyers, so are doctors. Some of us are specialties, but at the end of the day, we look the same to a potential client as any other architect would look. So if you can then qualify people based on some experience and what you can afford, at the end of the day, you want to figure out, can I work with this person? It's like a job interview, right? Mm. Can I sit next to this person for these 8-hour design workshops, or work through a protracted design process to make sure the space works the way you want it to? Do I just like the person? That's really at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I would agree with the tendency to want to hire somebody who's both a cultural fit for your organization and that that embarking on this long project, you feel like you know that you can work with this person, that you're likable. You might decide to go out after work for some drinks together, or you want to have a beer together. I guess what I'm asking is more, is there is every architect trained in exactly the same disciplines? Are there people who are more or less qualified to work on projects that provide workspace for a variety of different working styles?
Yeah.
And if so, what are the sort of key factors in identifying those people?
Right. No, architects are just like doctors and lawyers. There's generalists, there's specialists, there's experience, and there's inexperience, and then there's the outright, corrupt, horrible, lying, deceiving types. The office sector is its own little animal, and it seems so easy because you just throw in some desks, and how hard could it be? But when you look at that, your office is going to generate revenue. It's not a necessary evil. It's not a fixed overhead expense. You're not just throwing money into a pretty space. This is going to drive your revenue. No different than creating the engine of your car. You might create the most beautiful car, but if that engine doesn't go anywhere, you're not going anywhere. So you'll want to find an architect who understands business, really. Just like when you look for a lawyer, you don't want a lawyer that just gives you a lot of babble and runs up the billable hours. They may be a super expert, but if they can't just step back and say, does it really matter what it means legally? Like, how can I help my client make a strong business decision? Because at the end of the day, a lot of legal problems can be solved through a business decision. And architecture, as much expertise as an architect can provide, needs to be able to help you make a business decision, whether you want more desks, fewer desks, more offices, or not. So you want to find an architect that has that mindset. And a lot of architects, unfortunately, they come from a lot of creative sides where they don't like it. They don't like business. They don't have an interest in business. They just aren't good at it. But they're really good at their section of architecture. I'd avoid that type when you're designing a co-working space. But then the hardest one is finding an architect who's lived and breathed co-working or some kind of shared space where they basically get it. And you'll never get it unless you've been in there. I've really met almost no one, or maybe one other who's like me, who has not only been in the trenches, but actually have run it, scaled an operation, and still practice architecture. Not to say that I have some special sauce, but like others people who aren't parents yet and make assessments about what parenting is like, you just don't know until you've become a parent. And once you're thrown in that, you just have a sudden awareness.
This is certainly true until you actually have run a co-working space or a co-working company. It's really hard to know what you're getting yourself into. So one question that I've been thinking about is in terms of the DIY aspect. A lot of people start out with small budgets, and so they'll buy furniture where they can. Sometimes that furniture is used furniture. Sometimes they inherit furniture from the company that was in the space before. Mix and match furniture from Craigslist or FreeCycle, wherever they can get it. So how do you see furniture playing into the design mix in this, from this angle? And do you find that it's possible to successfully mix the sort of old furniture that you inherit with some new pieces? And if so, what are those essential pieces that you recommend to people that they have in a space?
Yeah, this is a matter of style. I think if you look back at the history of coffee shops and see how the mom and pops run it versus the bigger brands, there's a consistency that most will eventually want, if nothing else, just to know how to maintain them. Because if you have 10 different, it's like having 3 TVs in your house and 3 different remotes. You'd rather have the same TV so that the same remotes work everywhere. Same thing with troubleshooting, maintaining some of your furniture that may or may not last through the years. I'm a big advocate of keeping the same, but it's also more expensive. I get it. But furniture in general is going to it has become more and more important in these kind of spaces because it really is a shift your dollars from your capex, your capital improvements such as walls and ceiling towards FF&E, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. It's more dollars toward there. One, because the emphasis is about a variety of furniture spaces versus so much a variety of physical spaces, even though I don't agree with that, but it's what people are doing. And the more efficient your space is, which means the more people you want to be able to fit in there, that means you just need more chairs. If a traditional space, office space, can hold 50 people and you figure out a way to fit 75 people in there, well, you just added 25 more seats to your budget. So I guess the number one thing you really want in your furniture budget and focus on is your chairs.
Yeah. So often we talk about chairs as being sort of the most important thing. And, obviously part of that has to do with the fact that people are sitting on them all day long. And so they need to be comfortable. They need to be ergonomic. What else do you find important in a chair? And is a Costco chair or an IKEA chair comparable to a Steelcase or Hahn or Aeron chair?
Yeah, the biggest pros of buying from Staples, IKEA, CB2, West Elm is that they're much cheaper per chair. The biggest downside is that the warranties are limited or non-existent. If you buy a Steelcase, Herman Miller, Hone, or anything, they almost always have a 5 or even lifetime warranty. So that anything happens, you can call them up and get it fixed. So it just depends on your timeline of what your investment into these the chairs.
And your budget, of course, because with one of the higher end chairs, you're looking at a base cost of $500 a chair normally, right? Unless you've got a super steep discount.
Yeah,
as opposed
you basically have to
$99.
Yeah, you basically have to budget between $450 and $700 for a true task chair. So people will say, fine, you know what? I'll get $100 from IKEA, and every year I'll get a new chair. And after 5 years, I'll want brand new chair, so it's going to look great. But IKEA discontinues items sometimes, and so you're not going to be able to buy that same chair every year, year in and year out. And if you're okay with a differentiation or variety or discontinued, then that's just, you roll the dice. But specifically about chairs, no matter where you buy from, I think I would encourage people to really look at wheels, because when you're sitting all day long and it's fixed, whether it's on carpet or concrete or any type of flooring, that ability to not at all move or adjust to your little nuances throughout the day is going to weigh you down. Those wheels really, really help. The only time I think you should use chairs without wheels is in a setting where you're not going to be there for more than an hour or two, such as a meeting. Something called a guest chair, where in a private office you have a main chair and you have a secondary chair. The secondary chair is for guests and visitors. So really look for chairs with wheels.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, touchdown space versus all-day workspace. There's a really big difference in what people's bodies can withstand. And at the end of the day, if the furniture doesn't support them, then they're not going to be able to get their best work done. We just have another minute here. I'd like to wrap up with a general sort of how to avoid mistakes that you've made in the past. So you've been designing and running co-working spaces for almost 9 years now. What is the most common mistake you made in the beginning, or that you see people make at blanks, either at Blank Spaces or just in the co-working world? What's sort of the one mistake you advise people to avoid?
This was my first business, and I really did not know how to either bootstrap, stretch my dollar, or kind of hack and be more creative. I should have really done some research on, or either worked for a startup or done some research on, or networked and learned how startups and small businesses, run their business. I could have saved a ton of money. And so the corollary to that is really just capital. And that's no different than any other business. It's hard to predict your sales and your volatility in your sales and just your cash flow. And having access to capital will save your life. One is cheap, it's education, learn, get yourself in the trenches. And the second is no different than everyone else's, money.
Okay, so some really general tips there. Finally, let me just ask the question of the moment, since I know we talked about this beforehand. It can be hard at times in co-working spaces to find, especially ones that have more open space, to find a good place to make a phone call. And you don't want to be that guy in the cafe with a super loud phone voice, making sales calls all day long, or running trainings on your computer, remote trainings with your remote team. So a lot of spaces look to phone booths as a place for members to duck into without having to take over conference room time for a quick, hour-long private call or such. Some people have members who tend to camp in phone booths all day long and consider them their little micro office. And others have phone booths that are really inadequately designed in that it gets really hot in there. There's no soundproofing. What is your overall take on a phone booth?
Yeah, Iris, you know the answer to this. You asked this just because you want to say it. I am the only person in the entire co-working world who has not deviated from this position, which is phone booths are horrible. They're bad, don't do it. They're a waste of money. I don't even think they're legally allowed because they do not comply with ADA. So please don't spend your money on it. I was just in a phone booth yesterday at a very heavily funded workspace that has a lot of experience scaling and designing these spaces. And their phone booths did absolutely nothing. Zilch, nada to the acoustics. It gives you a false sense of security that when you're in there, your calls will be private. The only reason why your calls are private in that phone booth is that it's nowhere near a workspace. That's it. It could have been an open door made out of tissue paper. That would have done just the same job. The only thing that gives you that psychology, that emotional feel that it's private is that there's a physical barrier that when you close that door, you felt that air gap just kind of go like, right? But sound like right through. I heard footsteps, light footsteps, loud footsteps. I heard whispers right through the door, in and out. The person outside of me said they could hear everything I said. So
not a private place to work. Perhaps a better designed phone booth could be on its way.
Yeah,
Since I don't think we have that cone of silence Liz is always talking about. Nobody's developed that cone of silence yet to drop around.
There is a couple of these technology things where it kind of helps break that sound. If you put this cone thing in there, that probably helps better than a phone booth, honestly, because it's actually been researched more. But please, my one piece of advice is just don't do it. If you do it because you like the look, you like the kitschness of it, because it harks back to the days of analog, plain old telephone system, fine. But don't think that you're actually doing anything to help the cause by separating privacy. Nothing.
Well, there we have it. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Jerome. It's been a pleasure, and I will see you on a different call in the near future.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I will see you back here next week at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll be talking with Melissa Saubers of the Kansas City Co-working Alliance about the benefits to building an alliance of shared workspaces in your region, how that benefits your community, your bottom line, and the larger community as a whole. Looking forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.